North Norfolk coast is interesting all year round. In the winter, many of the birds that breed in the Arctic come down and spend the winter on our relatively mild, frost-free, snow-free coasts, and in huge numbers. So you can observe them. That's one of the things we look at. And some of these waders that are really quite hard to identify, wading birds, with a telescope, and we can usually pick them out and look at these quite subtle differences. So that's one thing. Often you'll find that someone will just find an insect or a plant or something that you know, as the tour leader, you know nothing about. And that's brilliant, because you think, oh, okay, I think it's one of those, or that family. I'll look it up later. And you learn. I don't think there's been a day of any tour I've ever done in which I haven't learned something, either by someone telling me or me having to look it up. And that's just fascinating. Well, I try to work with everybody's interests. It's really important, I think. And I've always said to every group I've worked with, there's no such thing as a stupid question. The most obvious questions are sometimes the most interesting. And I think I take particular pleasure in working with people who have had little experience of watching nature before, because they get the most to gain. You know, those of us who are perhaps fairly used to these things might, be looking for the rarer birds or the more unusual plants. But if it's all new to you, it's just a wonderful panorama. Everything's exciting. And the other thing in winter, perhaps, is just there's not so many people, which is a real benefit. You get a lot of people in the summer on the Norfolk coast. The winter can be cold, but we have a lovely warm hotel that we return to. We have some nice places for lunch that we disappear into now and then. Nice warm coach. And generally there's something very special about being out in the marshes, in the wind, just experiencing it, feeling it, as the birds do that we're looking at. Blakeney Point is one of these fascinating places. Many years ago I stayed out on the end of the point, and it's fascinating. It changes every year. So the boatmen that we work with in the area are never quite sure on their first trips of the year whether the point is going to be in one place or another, and it can vary a huge amount depending on storms and things over the winter. The family of boatmen we work with, we're into the second generation now. They're a lovely group of people. One of the benefits of being there quite a long time and going there regularly is just getting to know these families who live on the coast and working with them. I love going out to Blakeney. We look at the plants, particularly on the coast, and you might think there's not many flowers in January, February in Norfolk, but there are things that grow on the sand dunes and on the shingle banks which really don't grow anywhere else in the UK. So that's fascinating to look at. We try to bring in the history and the culture, as I said, as much as possible in the so-called wildlife tours. I mean, they're very much about wildlife and nature, but they're very led by the ACE guests as well, who are interested in everything, of course, and I'm interested in pretty much everything, as I'm sure you are. And the history of the places we visit is really important, because that feeds into the land management and the ecology and the birds and wildlife that we see. So one word. Abundance is the one that comes to mind. I mean, we often see barn owls gliding at dusk. That's always a real highlight, sometimes from the bus as we travel back to the hotel in the evening. I really like the Norfolk real ales, and we visit one or two pubs, which is really pleasant. Our hotel has a great bar, so that's a bonus at the end of a long day, a pleasant day. And those big skies that we mentioned, the landscapes that you mentioned, just being able to see that. There's about half a dozen highlights, but abundance is the thing.